Honestly, some of these aren't conspiracies at all, and are just little known facts that sound like honest to God conspiracies. And some of these are just the result of crazy people looking for the next crazy conspiracy. Also, I made this little iceberg, so we have some sort of path and destination. The farther down we go, the farther into the contrived, but also the farther we start to stray from the solid truth. Like, the Queen's trapped family members. The royal family needs to keep up their prim and proper presentation of their monarch. Because they need to control how people perceive them, it's pretty obvious someone's going to get the short end of the stick. If you watch this video of mine, which I'm sure you haven't since it has like 3.5 views, you know the Queen's cousin, and not the one she was married to, but her two first cousins, Catherine Bowes-Lyon and Nerissa Bowes-Lyon, from her mother, Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, had been locked away for decades so the public wouldn't see them. I'm guessing you may not know anything about them too, and you may be wondering, okay, so why'd they lock them up? What'd they do to be locked up? Well, they were born undesirable to the royal family. Reason being is Catherine and Nerissa both had what were announced as severe mental disabilities. They were both institutionalized for their entire lives and held away from the public eye, as to not blemish the appearance of the royals. Sadly, they passed away in 1940 and 1961 after their lives of anguish. But at least it wasn't a long life of loneliness and anguish, is what I would like to have said, but as you could have expected it, those death dates, the announcement of their passing, and their gravestones were all fabrications, made up by the royals, a point to further their distance from who they saw as undesirable. Both held in the Royal Earlswood Hospital in Redhill for 45 and 73 years respectively, until their actual deaths in 1986 and 2014. They were born in 1919 and 1926, and they both lived until the elderly. Though they had long lives, their records show that they had never been visited once by the Queen, never had been visited by any of the royal families, and not even a single member of the Bowes-Lyon family. They were both thrown away and left to live a life without any family or comfort. What's even more saddening is when Nerissa actually died, because it was so recent, we know not a single member of her family was in attendance of her funeral, and they're certainly marked with gravestones fit for people thrust into the shadows. When these revelations were brought to the Queen herself, she said, "We have no comment on it at all. It is a matter of the Bowes-Lyon family." As if her mother wasn't a Bowes-Lyon? Grim start, I know, but that is one of the very few ones I knew preceding the research of this video. So whatever comes next is just as a surprise to me as it is to you. Which is actually a lie because I did a video on this, the Queen's stolen jewels. Two of the most notable being the orb and scepter, the orb being a symbol of godly power, which has 9 emeralds, 18 rubies, 9 sapphires, 365 diamonds, 375 pearls, a single amethyst, and a single glass stone. Atop sits a cross that represents Christ's dominion over the world, hence the globe-like structure, and it was actually made back in 1661 for King Charles II. This scepter, known as the Sovereign Scepter, actually holds the largest clear-cut diamond. This diamond is actually the Cullinan 1 diamond if you've ever heard of that, but it was also known as the Great Star of Africa, because that's where it was found in 1905, and was gifted to Edward VII, Queen Elizabeth II's uncle, in 1907. But why exactly would South Africa gift its biggest diamond in the world away? One worth a whopping $2 billion in today's estimation. Because I know about this diamond in particular, I'll tell you just a little bit more before its little reveal. The Cullinan 1 and the Star of Africa aren't really the same diamond. This diamond is huge, right? But guess what? It's the Cullinan 1 because it was split into many diamonds. The Cullinan 1 weighs 106 grams. Massive, right? Well, the Star of Africa originally weighed 621.2 grams. That's right. That's not even 1/5 of the diamond's original size when it was found. To put it into perspective, the average engagement ring in the US weighs 0.2 grams. The Cullinan 1, 106. But again, on what goodwill did the South Africans gift this royal diamond? Well, if you haven't noticed, the mine it was taken from and the man who started the slave work to steal the diamonds from the African people was Cullinan. The British army had attacked the original attackers, which were the Dutch, in 1899 because they wanted to mine more of the land, and they only stopped the war once they agreed that if the whites worked together, they could fight against the rest of the South Africans and they could decide their fates. The Buckingham Palace racism. This is a more modern one, and pretty well known one at that. One that's usually reported as, the Buckingham Palace bans minorities from jobs of power. I read that from an article. Which, those titles and the facts, fall pretty short of the surprising facts of the true stories. These castles, like the Buckingham Palace, are under the rule of right of the crown, which means the reigning monarch, and in this very long case, Queen Elizabeth II makes the rules, which one of those rules that she held was that anyone of color couldn't hold positions of power, including average office jobs at the palace. I'm not exactly sure why that would be called a position of power. This does not look powerful, and the only positions minorities were allowed to hold were domestic servants, and her palace were the only place where people with colored skin were allowed to work. But how was that possible exactly, with the whole progressiveness of the world? Well, if you've ever heard of the saying, who does she think she is, the Queen of England? Because it stems from the fact that the monarchs get certain privileges. One of those privileges being the exemption of all race and gender equality laws set forth in the UK, which Queen Elizabeth II made sure that it would be bargained for by a rule to prohibit people of color working for her in her palace, stopping them from the get-go at launching complaints into the UK courts. Because you can't break discrimination laws and be sued if you are legally exempt from those laws, which is obviously one of the many reasons people call her a racist, because when you make absolute sure that you can have racist policies put in place, then I don't know, maybe it might just be me and a couple other people, but that does seem like a racial bias against people of color. Though Prince William said, the royal family is very much not racist.
And can you just let me know, is the royal family a racist family, sir?
We're very much not a racist family.
Though he is quite literally the very last person anyone in the royal lineage would ever be upheld for their honesty for. Bloody Sunday, also known as the Bogside Massacre, on the 30th of January 1972, British soldiers shot 26 unarmed civilians during the protest march in Northern Ireland. 13 of those people were killed on scene, and one more died around 4 months later due to his injuries. This was a civil rights march. We know how much the monarchy enjoys civil rights. Not to mention, most people had been shot while fleeing the scene of the British Army's gunfire, but also while trying to help injured civilians. Most were teens, and they were unarmed. When these murderers returned home, Queen Elizabeth didn't hesitate to award them for their bravery instantly. An investigation was held, and they found nothing was out of the ordinary. But as the UK does, it was whitewashed and covered up. Only after about 10 years was another investigation held, and only a single soldier was charged, and not a single one of them, including that one, actually had any penalty for their crimes. And as of 2019, her comment on the matter was,
"It will bring forward proposals to tackle vexatious claims that undermine our armed forces, and will continue to seek better ways of dealing with legacy issues that provide better outcomes for victims and survivors."
Which pretty much translates to, get over it. Charles can't be king, which is referring to the now King Charles, and Queen Elizabeth II's thoughts on him not being fit to be a king. A monarch would usually step down. After being in her late 90s, it'd be pretty much obvious that she was going to die, so it would usually be her job to assist the new reigning monarch with their transition into power. But instead of passing it on, she held on to it in sort of a disapproval of the King Charles III. Supposedly, one of the king's guards said, "In some ways, the queen has behaved as if she's the only one who matters. She's not planned for the future very well. She almost seems to see herself as the last sovereign. Everything has been about what's good for her, not what's good for the monarchy in the long term." And whether that statement is true or not, since the 3rd grade I'm sure we all know that actions speak louder than words. The missing children. What some may not know is that in September of 1964, her and Prince Philip allegedly visited the Campbell's residential school. Not much is known about it, there aren't really any verifiable sources or accounts of her visiting, but that's also addressed in this, but there are witnesses. A letter was sent in 2008, and instead of attempting to reword the story they lived, I'll just read you their own words. "I'm an interior Salish spirit dancer, and I'm 58 years old. I live in Vancouver, Canada. I'm a survivor of the Campbell's and Mission Indian residential schools, both run by the Roman Catholic Church. I suffered terrible tortures there, at the hands, especially, of Brother Murphy, who killed at least 2 children. I witnessed him throw a child off a 3-story balcony to her death. He put me on a rack and broke some of my bones in the Campbell's school basement after I tried running away. I also saw him and another priest burying a child in the school orchard one night. In September 1964, when I was 12 years old, I was an inmate at the Campbell's school, and we were visited by the Queen of England and Prince Philip. I remember it was strange because they came by themselves, no big fanfare or nothing, but I recognized them, and the school principal told us it was the Queen, and we had all been given new clothes and good food for the first time in months, the day before she had arrived. I was a part of a group of kids that went on a picnic with the Queen and her husband and the school officials, down to a meadow near Dead Man's Creek. After a while, I saw the Queen leave the picnic with 10 children from the school, and those children never returned. We never heard anything more about them. We never saw them again even when we were older. They were all from around there, but they all vanished. The group that disappeared was 7 boys and 3 girls, in age from 6 to 14 years old. I don't remember their names, just an occasional first name like Cecilia, and there was an Edward. What happened was also witnessed by my friend George Adolph, who was 11 years old at the time and was also a student there too. Signed, William Arnold Combs. And as this letter alludes to, people have asked where those 10 children are, and are these 10 children even still alive? Because there are no documents of it ever happening. It's not even widely believed by the mainstream. But honestly, Given the occasion and the parties involved, I'd be inclined to believe this more times than not. Ultimately, it's probably not something either governments would ever acknowledge unless backed into a corner on national television and run down by reporters and confronted at every stop. So, Diana's Secret Service. As it goes, there are only two accounts for why Queen Elizabeth II can no longer let Diana live in this world. One, she didn't want Princess Diana marrying her boyfriend at the time, Dodi Al-Fayed, who was the son of one of the wealthiest men in Egypt. And the second reason, King Charles wouldn't have been able to get remarried if she was divorced and kept on living. What would make this an ounce more believable is a piece of a note Princess Diana had left her butler, Paul, 2 months after her divorce. It reads, "I'm sitting here at my desk today in October, longing for someone to hug me and encourage me to keep strong and hold my head high. This particular phase of my life is the most dangerous. My husband is planning an accident in my car, brake failure, and serious head injury in order to make the path clear for him to marry Tiggy. Camilla is nothing but a decoy, so we're all being used by the man in every sense of the word." Victor brought this to the police commissioner at the time, who proceeded to lock it away in a safe and never told anyone about it. The media was shocked and pushed the notion of her predicting her own death. Most people usually leave this part out, but her boyfriend that the royal family couldn't have around, Dodi, was also in the car during her famous fatal crash, and he died alongside her in that wreck. The only survivor was Trevor Rees-Jones, their bodyguard, whose head injuries caused him to not be able to recall any of the details of the crash, and his bedside statement while recovering was, "I remember that we were being followed, but nothing else." But lastly, let's sink our ship to the QAnon Queen. And no, I'm not talking about Georgia's 14th Congressional District Representative and local crazy person, Marjorie Taylor Greene, but the Queen's role in QAnon's narrative. Her death date could be considered a holiday for them because according to them, she's a reptilian humanoid creature, a cannibalistic baby eater, leader of the UK sect of the Satanic Ritual and blood drinkers. The rest of the world is behind the times because apparently she died nearly a year ago, and we've all actually just been seeing a CGI version of her. The Queen is actually colluding with the US President Joe Biden, who also was not actually the president of the US, and is the ringleader of the child trafficking in the US, because her pedo son hung out with the actual ringleader of the world child trafficking ring, Jeffrey Epstein, and the Queen and Jeffrey just so happened to take a photo in the same location. And what could be more convincing evidence than that? This entire section is a whole mess. They obviously prey on people who are intellectually undeveloped, older people facing cognitive decline who can't really make reality from imagination as well anymore, and vulnerable people, ones with extreme anxiety disorders that will react instead of think, and those with disabilities who are unable to reason out of fantastical claims. So they sort of just get their own little spot here at the bottom. I know, not the most comprehensive iceberg you've ever witnessed, but also, I'm sure we've all heard just about enough about the Queen. If you're British, long live the King. And if you're literally anyone else, yeah. But hey, if you enjoyed this video, then remember to hit the like button and maybe even subscribe. But on that note, see you next time.